this evening's scrutiny meeting. It's weird not to have to read out a piece of paper to you all the rules and regulations. First item on the agenda are minutes. Do I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of July 2021 as a correct record of the proceedings? All right. Item 2, apologies and substitutions. I've got apologies from Councillor Mooney, and he did ask Jeanette Stevens, Councillor Stevens, if she was substitute, but she's on holiday. So that's not a starter. And Robin Venard is away, as is Malcolm. I'm assuming Councillor Maynard's on his way or stuck in traffic somewhere. He may well be stuck. There were traffic lights on the ridge, all right from one direction, pretty bad from the other. So I was all right. And Councillor Carroll, well, yeah, turn up. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest. Any members have any disclosure of interest they feel they need to make? Not, I wouldn't think, given the agenda. Okay. Item 5, performance report, first quarter. Okay. Oh, Nicola, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Performance report before you provides a summary of the Council's performance against the 5 themes chosen by this committee earlier this year. An impact of the pandemic is still being felt and demonstrated with the housing and communities indicators. However, there are signs of improvement with additional homes and affordable housing handover compared to the fourth quarter of 2021. The indicators for economic development and poverty are a watching set of indicators to provide a picture as we emerge from the pandemic. It is noted that we are unlikely to meet the target to deliver additional income this year. The planning processing, you're aware of the issues and the action plan is taking place to improve matters. I trust I'll provide a summary of the report and the status of the indicators as at the end of June to enable you to make recommendations to the Cabinet for any action should you feel the need to.
Thank you. Anybody got anything to say on this? I'm looking at Councillor Barnes. He's usually got something to say on something.
I think others may want to speak, but if there's a space, I'll fill it for the moment. The one welcome piece of news is obviously the 3 greens. Although I was slightly puzzled that the trend rate on the take-up of council tax reduction scheme was actually down. In one sense, that's pleasing, but in another sense, it's slightly odd, because I would have thought, given COVID, I would have expected slightly more pressure on that. No doubt somebody can come up with an explanation. I also think the position on income generation has been remarkably robust, which is actually, I think, also pleasing, even if we have missed our targets. What is pretty disastrous are the figures on housing. One I would really like to tease out in some detail, which is what's happening on the homelessness, because the Cabinet approved capital funding by properties to try to cope with that. I'd like to know how many we now own, how much of the capital has been spent. Because it seems to me we are still paying out vast sums of money for what is effectively bed and breakfast accommodation, and people are still staying far too long in that accommodation. I would have hoped to see more impact from that programme than we've got. There may be other points I want to come back to, but I think that's the one I want to focus on immediately.
Okay, I think the first point you made about the council tax reduction. There was better than expected figures from Robin. Right, remembering there was less aggravation than he was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't looked into the details as to why that is. There hasn't been the increase in claims that we might have expected given the COVID pandemic. I mean, my only estimation would be that that's probably an impact of the furloughing scheme and the fact that people have remained employed with an income rather than having lost their jobs overall throughout this period of time. Obviously, we rely heavily on the tourism trade, which has had that extended level of furloughing period. So that would be my estimation at this stage. I mean, obviously, we'll see the true impact over the course of the year and whether that trend continues to remain a downward one or suddenly turns around and become an upward one as the economy starts to sort of regularise itself. But like I said, we have no real evidence to back that up.
Yes, I suppose too, people may have had smaller travel bills, which might be another factor. In which case, I would be slightly worried we'll see a jump in it. Let's take pressure while we can.
And do you have answers on the mountain?
Yeah, so we've purchased 5 properties, one of which has 4 flats in them. There's a number of, there's even more in terms of the number of actual units that we have. The programme is going very well. They've got a number that's still in the pipeline. In terms of the average week spent in temporary accommodation, I mean, the performance is down. Primarily, having spoken with housing about this, is due to the stall in the private sector market. I mean, it simply put, because as a direct result of COVID, people just aren't moving unless they absolutely have to, and that movement still hasn't, that churn hasn't come back. That's partly due to the fact that landlords aren't able to forcibly remove tenants as a result of non-payment at this stage, but also because I think general nervousness about moving and lack of availability in the marketplace. House prices have gone up significantly as well in the local area, which may have a direct impact on householders choosing to sell rather than rent, for example, with further reducing that private sector availability. But that's mainly it. It's just a significant lack of private sector churn, which is means that we just haven't got the properties to put people into at the moment.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the £3 million we set about aside for buying properties, that was, from my experience when I was portfolio holder, enough to buy about 12 properties at the average price around 230,000. And I'm sure Joe Pell told me we sold about 7, and you would add, was hoping to foreclose on a couple more in the not too distant future. So we have been pushing and trying to deliver on that, but like you say, with lockdown and other issues and people not wanting to move. But we have had some success with that. The second thing I picked up in the agenda was I want to praise our waste collection operator, because although they've had issues with lockdown with staffing off with COVID and bringing agency people in my own ward and I know from neighbouring wards, they've managed to effectively continue that service of weekly collection to the other garden waste. They've done very well, I think. And I think we should take note of that and record it. They have continued, have very rarely failed to provide a service, though they've had issues themselves. Thank you.
I think that's a good point you make there, Charlie, because you read around a lot of councils have got bin collection troubles and everything else, and we stopped collecting garden waste for a while, which I know annoyed some people. But at the end of the day, that's not critical. Getting the basic garbage away and recycling has still carried on, and no complaints from any of my parish councils about it. So no, that's sort of a success story, if you like, in the eye of the storm. So that's good. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to touch on housing. I agree with Councillor Barnes that the figures are clearly over target and therefore are not meeting the reduced target. But this was always predicted. And I'm sorry, I said this 2 scrutiny committees ago, that the target was set much too ambitiously. To expect a reduction in temporary accommodation or the number of weeks in temporary accommodation at a time when there were pressures, the end of furloughing and the end of the moratorium on housing evictions was unrealistic. But we went ahead with it. And so the target was set to fail. And it's going to get worse once once the moratorium filters through. Yes, of course, I agree with Ben that there is very little movement in the housing market, but the problem is that we are housing we're housing the street homeless at the moment. That is that risks coming to an end, and there are pressures which we seem not to have taken into account in our targeting. The other area I'd like to talk about is waste collection. Now, on page 13, I noticed we're running 3% below target. I think this could be solved very easily if the many blocks of flats that do not have recycling facilities were permitted to recycle. If some solution could be found for blocks of flats to recycle, that 3% would be filled easily and would be over target, not 3% under target.
Okay, thank you. I think on the, I suppose ideally in a perfect world, you have a homelessness target of 0. But we set a target, which always sounds wrong to set a target to try and achieve in homelessness, but it's basically a budgetary figure, is it? I think I'm right there. So you set a budget, you set a target which suits the sort of a budget. So you don't necessarily say, right, we need 65 homeless families. You budget that well, that's essentially we've got 6. If we afford that, but basically we're spending more money than we need to or want to.
So it's set based on financial considerations and not on need.
But yeah, you have to put something in the budget for you. If you put nothing in the budget, you say, right, we live in an ideal world, we won't have any homeless, so we don't need to have a budget for homelessness, then you'd be in trouble. So you have to set in your budget figure and assume how many you can get go over. It's bad news. Is that right, Tony? Can you put some meat on that?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Well, there was a question I was trying to answer, actually, which Councillor Barnes asked a few minutes ago, so I'll answer that one before I forget, forget the question, and Councillor Clark touched on it very briefly as well. So the amount that we spent on temporary accommodation at the moment is about £1.7 million. We've not spent it in this financial year up until the end of June. I think there might have been a subsequent purchase to that. I'm not sure on that. Out of that that 1.7 million, I think you said 5 units been purchased, but that also, we also received a grant, about 400,000. So the net cost to the council so far has been about 1.3 million. And that was reported in the outturn in 2021. And of course, there's a further allocation to the TA budget, the TA capital budget of about £6 million. And again, that, along with what wasn't spent last year, is reported in the capital programme, which is in the quarter 1 forecast report. And so, in terms of setting the budget, Chair, I mean, it's not really a particularly scientific exercise. The problem with setting the budget for homelessness is that with any budget you set, it's that the equation is very simple. It's price times volume. We can influence the price, and that's what we're trying to do with the purchase of TA units. We're trying to drive down the price of housing homeless people, but we can't influence the volume. The volume is something we can't control. So in terms of science, we go by what we spent today, and this is why members will recall, as part of the 21-22 budget setting process, we did add another, it was £300,000 to the revenue budget. At the time, I think, as you were concerned about that number, and as I say, there wasn't any real science to it. It was very difficult to predict, especially with the COVID circumstances and so forth. That's broadly speaking the methodology that we use, Chair.
I think our problem, of course, is it's bed and breakfast accommodation is very much more expensive. So if I hope I did misunderstand Councillor Cortell. If I did, I'm sorry, but I'm rather glad we went ahead to buy. And of course, house prices have gone up through the roof. So I actually wish we'd been a bit faster and bought a bit more. If I'm going to be critical, I think we set aside, I thought, 3 million, and we don't seem to have spent it all. And I'm not quite sure what has held us up, because it seems to me the way that, and I think it's more to quantitative easing than anything else, but there are other factors. The way house prices are going, the quicker we're into the market and the more we can acquire, the better the value of the money we've set aside to do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And Councillor Barnes makes a very good point. You know, I think as Tony said, we've spent £1.3 million as at the end of the last financial year, and that includes it's £1.7 million in total, but that includes £400,000 grant. So we've got about 1.7 left of that original 3 million. The reason why the Head of Housing and Communities came back to Cabinet to ask for more money is because the pipeline that we had in train exceeded the available amount of money. So there is a significant pipeline in train. I think the one thing I would say is obviously just the time it's taking to complete on some of these schemes is usually longer than we would have hoped. I think that's partly down to demands upon our legal services team and the ability for them to sort of to undertake the necessary work. The other thing I would say is that actually the biggest challenge that we found is the availability of the right types of property in the right types of areas. You know, I mean, if we want to buy a two bed property up in Sidley, then that's not a problem. You know, they become regularly available. But the problem is you can't put all of the homeless people we have housed into a single area. That would overload individual communities. So what we're trying to do is balance that out, find enough sufficient properties in balanced areas, as well as not just Bexhill, but you know, the rural areas, Battle and Rye, as well as the other towns, to make sure that we can house homeless people from around the district in closer to where they would normally be living. So it's not, yeah, I mean, it's a fair criticism that we could have bought more quicker. I think there have been some mitigating circumstances with regards to being able to complete on some of those.
If I can just push again on one of my zanier ideas. In building these things, one might have a look at whether we ourselves could build prefabricated constructs over some of our car parks. You don't remove the car parking space because you're building over the top of them. That gives you a site, and your prefabricated construction will give you some of these accommodations. So if the market is not throwing up the right kind of property, possibly we should be doing something about that using prefabricated construction.
Well, I was going to say I didn't want to draw attention to some other problems that we might have, but actually you need planning permission for that, so that might be even greater delay at this stage in time. Obviously, we're looking to work. We have got some interventions in that field to try and reduce those waiting times.
The other point which really worries me, and again, I realize this is largely out with our control, but I'd like to get some idea of how it's adding to our problems. Clearly, we're still suffering from very low build-out rates. Slightly amazing because across the country, completion rates seem to have been much higher in recent months, but we don't seem to be benefiting. And that means that the gap between permissions given and houses completed must have widened significantly in the last couple of years. I presume we're putting in another report on this, and I'm not sure I've seen it yet. But the gap now is very large. Given the pressures that are going to be on us, I wonder where we've got, and I realise we won't got very far, but with talking to other authorities with significant amounts of land in AONB and protected areas to see if we couldn't get some negotiation with the government about a formula for reducing our target, because to do that in advance of the local plan, I think, would be a very wise move given the gap we've got.
Yeah, no, you raised a good point, and you brought this up a few meetings back about making about writing to the other authorities. We are looking to progress that as part of the development of the local plan. We felt that was probably the best way to do it, so that we can use that input to inform our own local plan development. So that is happening. It's just obviously we've gone through a bit of staff churn within the planning strategy team. So you'd be glad to know Jeff Pyra's recently taken up post as our new planning strategy manager. So I'll be talking with him about how we progress this part of that, and we'll be using that as part of our attempt to mitigate the numbers of homes that we're being asked to deliver throughout the plan.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful that we've been given these performance details, but I see no point in us scrutinising them unless we can suggest something we can do to make the situation better. So I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the waste collection details. I'm very, very concerned on page 14 about the number of fly tippings, because obviously these are only the ones that have been reported rather than the ones that are going on that people just have closed their eyes to now. And it is becoming quite a pandemic in its own right. I'm wondering if possibly we could put up some dummy CCTV cameras at some of the most popular lay-by sites where fly tipping does go ahead regularly. To perhaps that might put somebody off. I think would imagine that if we were able to catch somebody and fine somebody and publicise that properly, again, it might bring down the numbers a bit. But I'm also appalled, and it is the insensitivity, the selfishness, the arrogance of some of our residents who have turned what should be bring sites, where a nice recycling area to help people out, as Councillor Cortell said, those who live in flats and don't have a collection, they have been turned into tips in their own right. And I'm just wondering if we could perhaps ask our comms team to put out some really good publicity about the fact that our household amenity sites are back up and running and that people can use them. I suspect some people are still very put off by the queues, but they've almost completely gone now. And so that would be my please. Thank you.
Councillor Cook would be glad to know that this was a discussion point at the corporate management team recently, and we did discuss about the fact that the recycling numbers have gone, well, the recycling percentages have gone down mainly because every bring site that we have around the district has been contaminated to the point where anything that was in there had to be burned or landfilled. So, but yeah, it was a point, and we are working with our comms team to develop up a strategy, just as you say, about educating people. I think now that the household waste recycling sites, which to be fair to them were operating at the absolute capacity that they could do COVID restrictions, have now been able to sort of remove those restrictions and operate at full capacity. I mean, I visited my local one recently, and you were in and out within sort of 15 minutes, which was unheard of this time last year. So I think I'm hoping that one would hope that would bring people back to the household waste recycling sites, and we're working closely with East Sussex to make sure that that's the case.
I think that's a good point that Councillor Cook makes, and an equally good point that you make, that the message needs to get out that the household sites are operating as normal. You can turn up and do stuff, as opposed to turn up, decide you're supposed to have made an appointment 4 miles down the road and not bother, and then wonder why someone does it in a later one. So that message goes out that they're up and running, and hopefully people are using it. Did we have an answer from Councillor Portel's second point about sort of recycling collections for
Oh,
flats?
yes, if I may. The percentage provided is actually a percentage that's recyclable of the collected waste. So actually, it doesn't matter if you have 1,500 households or 1,200 households, it's a percentage of that waste that is collected that's measured here. So it's, and again, I think part of the reason obviously is that people haven't been able to access other sites and you know, particular things, and that's why there's been a higher levels of contamination than we would expect. So yes, I take your point about the flats, but it wouldn't affect this metric in the long run.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to firstly echo Councillor Cook's point. In Sidley, that fly tipping has been a real issue since the pandemic, and I think it's just perhaps a case of habits that were sort of made worse during the pandemic are just stuck, even though the tip is back open. But I just think perhaps we as an overview and scrutiny committee, or through some capacity, need to really look creatively at a solution to this, because whenever I bring up fly tipping, whether that's in an area that always gets fly tipped, whether that's a bring site, whether that's sort of somewhere new, there's a few roads in Sidley which are sort of, there's not many people that go down them apart from dog walkers, and so bits of fly tipping appear here, there and everywhere. When you ask about CCTV, you're told, well, it's not effective. It's not effective at catching people. It's not, you know, it's not worth it. That's what you get told. You talk about signs, you get, well, signs don't deter people. So we need to find a creative solution beyond just comms, because comms is great, but fly tipping is one of these things that is always an issue, and we need to find a way to fix it.
I think if you've got the answer to that, that'd be the golden nugget. Probably every council in this country is looking.
There always needs to be a first for every solution, so why couldn't it be us?
That's a club.
Yes, I still think a lot of people don't know that Robber provide a bulky waste collection service, you know, where if you want to get rid of your cooker or your 3-piece suite and stuff like that. And the rates are not that much different to some of the commercial people. Maybe we could stick it on My Alerts and something like that, where people could actually see that we do actually provide that service. I did check the figures. It's the service provide pretty much a break-even thing. It doesn't cost us a loss to provide that. Maybe we could stimulate that more and get more people using Robber's own service.
I think, to be honest, Charlie, if you've got someone whose mindset is to dump a 3-piece suite at 2 o'clock in the morning down a country lane, and a thing on My Alerts telling them that they could pay 15 quid and they can't pick it up, probably going to make a lot of difference. Well, maybe I'm being a bit sort of. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much. I think encourage people. Where some people involved when it comes to going for usually quite frankly, most don't I actually based on and clients on my race trying to do stuff in template and saying that I got that like was successful and both of them fine. So again, it's encouraging a culture of supporting the and knowing that if they do get effort, that the authorities collectively will actually that's the aim. I guess in terms of what we can do here, the other really useful thing, I guess, is understanding the type of pricing involved. The worst one environment from try and get a 3 AM on a country lane where it's that's the very worst one environment. Environment carrier has to understand. Obviously, that is something we'll never get great costs both in of costs happening. Most people know. Well, I guess clearly between commercial waste and disposal of natural. And one thing I will congratulate the council. Speaking in real pricing, it's a strange thing about pricing, where legal pricing then becomes, if you like, 10% pricing. And that's why there are places where the pricing is a problem. They know fairly remote, fairly instant. It's one such place where it's become done big. Now it's going to be and it's a problem. But in terms of what this is, I think it's about trying to get information out there to the public as to the costs of what we use. Those people who are likely to price in larger items are not practical. I think one of the discretionary services that people are grateful for is we are significantly cheaper than any commercial operator. What we ask people to do is very clear, not the name stuff like it, but to be fair, we are very competent. So I think that's a really helpful discretionary service, that service that actually needs to do with that market. Certainly needs to make sure every time we send a payment that is discretionary service.
Councillor Cook, did you indicate to come back?
Yes.
No, okay. Any recommendations to Cabinet we have then? Well, one we could put in that the council tax bill receives a advertisement, if you like.
And more bear in mind, there have been some constructive suggestions made. It would be good to have them looked at in some way. And I think sometimes we're pushing at an open door, but occasionally you wonder.
Did you indicate, Councillor Portal?
Yes, sir, I did. Don't quite understand that. In my ward, 90% of the properties are flats. Now, some do have recycling, but there is a significant proportion that don't, including the 26 block, including the block of 26 flats I moved into 6 months ago. We don't have recycling, which, and I can say that a significant number of residents in that block would like recycling. Could officers perhaps look at some way of encouraging or resolving recycling for blocks of flats that don't have it?
Ask for that one.
I don't, but I can talk to our neighbourhood services manager to ascertain what the potential for that is and come back to the council.
I'm assuming that if the wagon, if you like, is collecting from flats, it's the same.
It's normally to do with an accessibility issue more than anything else, or if the area is inaccessible, then that's normally the reason. But I can check on the reasons, particularly if the council has some concerns about a specific area. I can check on the reasons why that isn't happening.
No, I just wondered if they're using a larger bin, so just everything goes into a larger bin, it's a different lorry, and is that then taken to a site and instead of just going straight to the incinerator, is that then goes to a sorting site? Separated, I don't know.
No, if it's a recycling bin, then it'll all go to the sorting area.
But if you're picking up, say, a large bin, which is going to be mixed.
Oh, then yeah, we don't do a sort of mixed general versus recycling. It's got general waste in it, then it's contaminated and it'll just get burned.
All right. Absolutely.
Some time ago, I think we looked at this. I do remember when we were going back quite a way. And I can't speak for the country, but I know there are several blocks definitely in Bexhill. I don't know whether it applies to Councillor Cortell's block, but I know it was somewhere the access was just hopeless. There was just no way that the lorry could get up there. And some flats have resolved it by having like a central point where people can, obviously it's a bit more difficult if they're very elderly and perhaps can't walk very far, but if there's a central point, sometimes people are very happy. I know that there are areas such as Sainsbury's and places where there are bins, but that probably is just too far. But if there could be some central point where they would just put out when on the days of collection, there must be a way around it, because some of the solutions, I know my son lives in a block of flats and I think they still use bags. I don't think there's probably many like that, but you know, I've said looked at him and I thought, well, why can't they have just one big bin somewhere? Because there's 2 or 3 blocks along there, and they don't have recycling. They could share, even if it meant walking a little way. I'm sure they'd rather do that than use sacks.
Well, I suppose.
Are there many blocks of flats that still use sacks?
Yes.
Right.
I suppose the simplest thing is you 2 bins, like anyone else.
Large bin somewhere,
you
central
put
point.
your black sack in that bin and you put your recycling stuff in that bin. And
Primarily, the sacks are used where there's no suitable position in which to have a bin that can sit outside your house. Normally, sort of the town centre area is quite common, more than anything else. I mean, in some areas of the town centre, we do daily collections to make sure that the people have access to those services. So we do go above and beyond where it's feasible to do so. I mean, I personally lived in a flat in Bexhill where we had a commercial collector come in. And that's not uncommon where the management company of the block will have, you pay as part of your maintenance fee that they come and collect it as a commercial sort of thing, and that's where you do get the very large sort of big communal bins rather than the individual bins.
Yeah, can I just say that in Rutherfield Avenue, for example, at the top where they do have a central point where there is a very large bin, and people have to walk up to, obviously, to take their rubbish to it. But it's very well used, and I think people would rather do that than maybe have sacks close to home. They'd rather just walk a little bit, as long as it's not too far. And that seems to work very well there, because I've looked at that and thought, well, why can't they use that anymore? I think that's probably because it's managed. Maybe would it be a private, as you said, a private contractor? But surely we could utilise and do the same sort of thing. Some of these blocks. I'm going along from what Councillor Cortell's saying, really.
I'll raise it with the neighbourhood services manager to get the detail and come back to the councillors outside of the meeting. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's resolved that we consider this report, which we have done, and recommend any actions to Cabinet, which we've done. Small points, yes.
I'm happy, rather than making them as recommendations to Cabinet, I'm happy to take the points made by Councillors Barnes and Maynard and just implement them. I don't see any reasons why that should necessitate a Cabinet decision at this point. We can do that under our own steam, off the back of the advice from Scrutiny.
Okay, so someone want to move that? And someone to second that? That's a Barnes. All right, all in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 6, revenue budget, capital programme monitoring, page 19 to 26. Tony.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the Q1 monitoring report. So it covers the period of the financial year 21-22, covers April to the end of June. And the report is asking members to note the Q1 forecast. There is also, and usually there's a request to approve the award of an RSI grant, or Rough Sleepers Initiative grant, that we've been given from MHCLG. This is more a sort of a housekeeping thing. The MHCLG request that it's formally approved by members, so that's why that recommendation is in there. And that grant is to help fund further purchase of further temporary accommodation units, and members can get more detail from that in paragraph 16 of the report. So the headlines, the revenue budget is slightly over budget, was forecast to be slightly overspent this financial year. It's about £144,000 over. Again, Appendix A refers, that should give members hopefully enough detail for them. The explanations are given in paragraphs 4 to 11. So when I say it's 144,000 overspent, it's 144,000 over what we'd originally said we would take from reserves. So it's when we set the budget back in February, we said we'd take £2.7 million from reserves. We're now thinking at this point of the time of the year that it might be £144,000 above that level, just to clarify that. The explanations rather are given in paragraphs 4 to 11. The main ones, we set aside £300,000 for planning appeals and also £270,000 for additional support for planning, which Ben and Nicola rather mentioned in the performance report earlier. Also, part of the budget for 21-22, there was a target of savings or cost efficiencies of about 632,000, and the work is still ongoing to try and identify where we can make those savings from, but we don't expect that we'll make the full target of those in this financial year. So we assume that we won't achieve about 470k of that target. On the sort of positive side, I suppose, those overspends are offset by a reduction in financing costs of about 688,000 in this financial year, and additional grant income of about 317,000. Now, the financing costs I'll come on to now. Additional grant income is additional money that we've got from the MHCLG. I think I've explained to members before that it's not always easy to predict when we get that money from MHCLG, and it doesn't help us for financial planning purposes, but at the end of the day, it's money that we weren't expecting when we set the budget back in February, so I'm very grateful for anything that we can get, basically. So that's helping us out a bit more. So the financing costs, well, I'll move on to the capital programme. That's detailed in Appendix B. Now, in overall terms, it's only increased by about 1 million from what was set by Council in February. But there are some big changes within the capital programme, notably the North East Bexhill office development of £15.7 million. That's not going ahead this year, but there is an increase of £6 million in the temporary accommodation budget, which we discussed in the previous report as well. That's in addition to the £3 million that members approved, I think, back in September 2020, I think it was. Also, members will recall, this was something that we mentioned many times, I think, during the year last year. The pandemic slowed everything down, including the pace of the capital programme. So there's quite a lot of slipped capital schemes that we pushed into the 21-22 financial year. It's still going to be, as the year goes by, we'll have better information, but it's still debatable, I think, whether we will actually spend all that money in the forthcoming financial year. But because of that slippage, we've been able to reduce the financing cost because we're just not borrowing as much as we thought we were going to be, or thought we were going to borrow as quickly as we were going to borrow. But what it has also done is that the money on schemes that we were funding from revenue reserves, instead of paying for that in 2021, that's now going to come out of 21-22. So it looks like it's increased the reserve, or increased the drawn reserves this financial year. It has, but it wasn't unexpected. We knew that was going to be the case, and it's still part of the sort of plan, if you like, that we developed last year when we were setting the budget. Appendix C does summarise the impact on reserves, and that's probably worth members focusing attention on that when we look at these reports as well. But as I say, the planned impact was 3.3 million drawdown from reserves. 2.7 million, as I say, was to fund the revenue budget gap. The other 600,000 was to fund capital schemes from revenue reserves. But as I say, there's been a big number of schemes that have slipped forward into 21-22. So that's increased the amount that we take out of reserves to fund capital expenditure. And also the £144,000 revenue overspend that I explained earlier. So the impact on reserves is 4.2 million we're forecasting at the moment, rather than the 3.3 million that we originally planned to when we set the budget. And I think the capital slippage point, Chair, also, I think that was referred to in the 2021 report that Robin took to committee back in July this year. Just a little bit about collection fund performance. Excuse me. The rates for both council tax and business rates at the moment, as at the end of Q1, are slightly better than they were this time last year. In some respects, it doesn't really matter in 21-22 because the budget or the money that we get for council tax and business rates is set. If there is an under-collection in either of those, then it impacts us in future years, and we'll be assessing that when we do the budget and the medium-term financial plan over the next few weeks and months. So hopefully that's helped members. I've tried to simplify the report this time around and taken out so the bigger tables are in last time and tried to make it a little bit more succinct, but it's not the easiest job. And I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair, if I can answer them. I will.
Thank you. I think I hope I'm not going to get shot down by a planning committee, but and I suppose it's a really awkward one. But if, for example, the planning committee are making a decision on a dodgy site, if you like, we've got their potential liability of £300,000 on Strand Meadow, Burwash, and Neville Road. That's potentially £300,000. I also assume then you can add on new homes bonus that you have lost and seal. Still count seal. You don't have to new homes bonus. But it's almost, I respect the planning committee making the decisions on planning, because it's awkward. And I wouldn't go in planning. But you almost sort of, to the back of your mind, you almost got to think of the cost if you sort of go with, if you like, a public opinion, which I'm assuming that's what happens. Public opinion says, we don't want that built on, so you say, all right, so you go with your residents, and then someone makes an appeal, and then you're clobbered. But I don't know, because I'm not panicking. I just see a nasty figure. Go on in. Thank you.
I mean, obviously, with regards to appeals, the planning committee can only refuse any application based on planning grounds. So in each case, there's been a justifiable reason from the planning committee as to why, on planning grounds, as to why these schemes were not acceptable. We set aside this as a sort of a contingency in case that we're unable to successfully defend that. I mean, the political landscape with planning is constantly changing, and you never quite know what the planning inspector is going to say in any given case. So, I think the planning committee make their decisions based on the evidence both in front of them and their knowledge of the area, and that we will continue to defend those decisions as we go forward into appeal.
Now I'm going to get shot down by a planning committee. Tony Cameron.
Forgive me for correcting you, Ben, but the reasons for refusing this particular application were not justifiable, in my view. I voted in favour of the application. The reasons for those who voted against it, well, they were largely twofold. There were two members who voted against it for good planning reasons, although, in my view, the judgment was misplaced. But you are quite correct, Chairman, in saying that a number of members voted against it under public pressure, and that should not happen, but it did. There was huge public pressure in this application. It was a wrong decision, and I regret it.
think that's the point I was making, because if you're a councillor, then you're, you know, the decisions you make, and this is why I don't envy the planning committee at all, because you've always got a winner and a loser. And, you know, public pressure is there. We are to represent public, that's their job, as you see it. But if you get enough earache, if you like, then, you know, it's a difficult one. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to move away today on understanding the start with the cemetery. So we've got 63,000 kids and it's paid down.
Yeah.
Oh, third one down.
So the spend today is 63,000. The outturn is 472,000. Right, the variance figure was wrong. Is that what you get?
Yeah,
Sorry, lots of microphone.
Where the spend is. What I'm trying to understand is, again, members be well aware of this. I'm extremely uneasy with the idea of the state possibly fresh store and option. Where obviously now actual food, but I know that housing that would be unacceptable or some balance and loss come back into the council. I'm trying to understand where we are in terms of cost. See what's in front of us today, but is that obviously the cost of municipality, or are we going to get that instead of what we want, or are we actually running that on?
Okay, sorry, just to quickly, before I hand over to Ben, sorry, actually the table is right. The quarter one variance column is measuring the difference between the 21-22 original budget and estimated outturn. In terms of what's been spent in terms of the 63,000, I don't know the answer to that question. I can come back to you, or yeah.
And in terms of the office development itself, is this Bowman or is this Shell?
This time I'll hand you over to Ben.
You know, I'll ask you questions. So
Well, I can cover off both points. The cemetery entrance, obviously, the actual is to June, the 30th of June. The residual money has since been spent in the subsequent months of July and August. So, because that's when the project itself was finished and invoiced for.
what I'm trying to establish for you, Terry, is there's no growth in the project.
No. The original budget was set by it was as set previously and agreed by council. I think 2018. If I'm right off the top of my head. In terms of the northeast Bexhill development, you're right. It's there. The slippage is there. That at this stage does not look like it's progressing at all at this stage, because the potential tenant is now looking at a different option in terms of their future.
I think obviously, and I'm not. I'm just trying to establish are we still processing the correct answer? That might happen. If that's or dialogue is still going on with that company or that instead. Thank you very much.
At the moment,
I don't wish you to breach any confidence.
No, that's fine. And I think that's perfectly right and proper, and you're right, Councillor. I think at this stage, it was made very clear to us that we were no longer the preferential choice. At which point, I think the council said, okay. When I say the council, so we have said to them at this stage that okay, we will take a step back. Obviously, if they were to reapproach us, we would re-engage in those conversations. But there's no dialogue between us regarding this development at this stage. That's not to say that there doesn't continue to be dialogue in other matters, as they remain an important employer within the district.
certainly correct. And again, I hope that people are done by I'd like to know in opposition it clearly is travel to work area rather than
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I'm grateful for what has just been conveyed on the stepping back on the office. I think actually, in some ways, this may happen quite a lot because I think people are reviewing their working practices. So I think we're right to be cautious too in not going ahead because I think there could be problems. I just wanted to comment a little on planning because I think your assumption, Chairman, was the inspector's ruling on costs is always justifiable. I find it sometimes so, but sometimes not. There was a lesson to be learned, I think, from one of the appeals we lost, where the inspector made the fairly obvious point that the planning permission ran with the land and not with the person. And I can't help feeling there, some officer should have said, why not temporary permission on the land rather than personal position of the person. In other words, I think there we were at fault, and I think actually a slightly more savvy officer might have actually got it right, and we would have achieved the same outcome. But where I think the inspector was totally wrong is on the decision which never came to planning committee, which was in West Bexhill, where I think we are absolutely right to be concerned about the potential of large fines coming from the Environment Agency if we get the drainage wrong on these big development sites. Nobody has ever said, neither officers nor indeed members, that development cannot take place in West Bexhill. The real problem there is making sure you don't have an adverse effect on the potency levels, and that your drainage scheme has to be watertight, I forgive the pun, for not really the lifetime of the development, but ongoing really in perpetuity. And I thought, and I don't know if there is any way we can actually bring this point home to the inspector who ruled against us and gave costs. I'm not worried that he ruled against us. That's part of the luck of the game. But I think to think we were irrational to be so worried about drainage, I think was irrational on its own part. And I think we should take that up with the inspectorate because I thought it was a bad decision, frankly, on costs, and one which I don't really feel you should chase judicial review against the inspectorate. But I have to say, I think we should say to the inspectorate, when you come to Ramsars and drainage, you are going to have to be very cautious, and they really ought to study their own position.
I think, I mean, for the purposes of this report, really, it's more about just ensuring that, and I'm assuming Tony will back me up on this, is that it's just about articulating that there is a risk. That particularly around these two planning applications, it's anticipated that there's a risk, and we felt that for the purposes of transparency, it was best reflected in the budget so that we could anticipate that potential cost. That's it. It's not to comment on the merits or not of either the planning permission or the appeal. This was merely about articulating that risk to the budget and making sure that members had sight of it rather than sort of concealing it in the background, and just making sure we were being transparent.
I suppose the potential there is that we put it in the budget, but it might not cost that much. Yeah. Sorry.
And if I can just make a couple of, I genuinely think, and I hope something is done to bite back on the inspectorate who I think was quite irrational in his cost judgment. I have to say on this one, since we are talking, I don't want to talk about merits, but I have to say on at least one of these, an inspector has already ruled against a broadly similar development. I think we were quite right to fight it, but obviously we have to make provision in the capital budget for that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I absolutely support everything Ben's just said about. It's absolutely right to draw members' attention to this, and hopefully it won't. 300k. It's a worst case scenario. It won't be any worse than that. And there's also whilst in here, you mentioned something about new homes bonus and potentially lost money in new homes bonus grant, and that's absolutely right. That possibility is there. But in theory, the new homes bonus as a scheme is sort of up for grabs. It's supposed to be coming to an end, and whilst we have no information on what its replacement will be, if there is a replacement, it is actually still up for grabs, and we won't really know what the impact of the new homes bonus or whatever its successor is going to be. We won't really know what that impact is going to be until the government do their spending review in the autumn. So it's a little bit up in the air.
Councillor Mayor.
In terms of performance issues, Mike Klein talks about the
Can you put your machine on?
Talks about capita coming in, which we're all aware of. I thought the figure was 160,000. I've seen now it's 270,000.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. For me, the accountants discuss the figures with the heads of service at the moment. The forecast is we think it's about 270,000. I can go back and check that and revise.
No, but it was previously in the public domain at 160,000. We're now saying it's 270. So is that because we now recognise? I say we, the administration now recognise that it's going to take longer, and so regarding more resource, or is this because we are going to take on more officers and additional costs, and it's the same time frame? It's either one or the other, isn't it?
Okay, I don't know the answer to that question, Councillor Lane, and I'll get some breakdown for you and get back to you if that's okay.
Councillor
Thank you, Chair. Very minor question. Who are the members of the Financial Stability Programme?
If you can help me out. I think Councillor Oliver, Councillor Dixon, Councillor Bayliss and Councillor Proshak. Bear with me a couple of minutes, Chair. I can come back to you on that point. Check it because I've got a meeting invite for Thursday.
On from that, would it be possible for us backbenchers to have an occasional briefing from the Financial Stability Programme Board?
take that up with your fellow Walker.
Chair, just to confirm membership, just to confirm membership, it's Councillors Oliver, Dixon and Proshak, and we have a first meeting for several weeks now on this Thursday. I believe the intention is to then report back further to members once that meeting's taken place to discuss some of the detailed proposals that submitted by heads of service.
Could be a case of ask the leader. Right. What do we got here? Recommendation: resolve that the report be noted, and to recommend that Cabinet approve the offer of a grant, which I think would be a pretty sensible idea, wouldn't it? So who wants to move that? Councillor Coleman?
I'll move that.
We'll move that, and we'll second that. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Work programme now. Last item, work programme. There we are. Ben says he's got one to add.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to sort of bring to members' attention that unlike last year, what it was agreed for this year was that we would be bringing the potential key performance indicator basket to overview and scrutiny prior to taking it to Cabinet. I just need to make sure that we fit that into the work programme somewhere. preferably somewhere like January would be appropriate if members don't mind. I think that gives us enough time then to take it through cabinet and onwards for implementation before the new financial year.
I did receive complaint that the agenda was light. So January it will not be light, by the looks of it. It's a sort of a swings and roundabouts sort of job. Also, the next meeting we've got the review of the environment strategy and the post-COVID recovery plan that was planned this evening.
Possibly.
Yeah, but I read this with slight amazement. I mean, I thought we'd already agreed that we were going to take in October the homelessness and housing, but I see it's still down for consideration and has not been included in the programme. Is there a drafting error, or should I move that we do take housing and homelessness in October?
Would you prefer to do that one instead of the environment strategy?
The trouble is we tend to get life very heavy, but I do actually value the controls. I'm anxious to don't leave the housing bubble because it's quite a big sum nationally, and we are not actually quite as well as last part qualified. Nevertheless, something was going rapidly. So I'm happy to go along with it in a month later if that can be done. But we've got one or two things that I remember quite busy. Funny enough, the post-COVID recovery plan is one I would probably say, because I think COVID is not going to go away.
If I can, I think the housing and homelessness strategy update is an important one, and we are prepared to do something for that in October. That's not an issue. We're prepared for that. I think given the resource issues we've had with regards to the delivery of the environment strategy in recent months means that I think it unlikely that a meaningful report can be brought forward in that sort of timescale, given that actually it would have to be written now, in effect, to be able to report back within sort of the 4 to 5 weeks between now and the next meeting. So I think whilst I'm happy to provide a report in terms of the actions that have been taken, I think in terms of a meaningful debate, that should be held over, a proper debate held over until we've got the resource in place and we're able to hold a climate change steering group meeting in advance of bringing something to overview and scrutiny. But that being said, I am happy to provide an update as to the actions that have been completed in relation to the environment strategy at the next meeting to make sure that members are kept up to date. If I can.
That sounds very compromise. Take housing and homelessness as the main item. Have an update on where we are in the climate strategy. Johnny?
Can I say I support Councillor Barnes on that, because we all know there's a ticking bomb going on here. When the moratorium on evictions is lifted, 6 months down the line from now, so we've got a plan ahead, because where's our plan B if there's a massive increase in people coming for homeless because landlords said the arrears are so unacceptable, or unfortunately some tenants may have taken advantage of the current situation. So we need to be on top of it. We need to say, right, we know what resources we've got, but what is our plan B, or obviously resources or extra income we can get? If there's a massive surge in the 6 months, and we've got to meet it. So I think it's very important to debate that. I can't leave that till February and stuff like that. I fully support what Councillor Barnes is saying.
Okay, is that doable then? Housing strategy or feedback, whatever, next month. A light touch on the environment strategy.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll provide update on actions in relation to the environment strategy to give members reassurance that we have still undertaken some work, even though it hasn't been the ideal start. And I think we would look to maybe bring a more comprehensive review of the strategy back to a later meeting in this, still within this civic year, and on this work programme to give members a greater in-depth discussion about how that's progressing.
Will we still include the post-COVID recovery plan? I know Councillor Baines is doing some trips now end of this week. She's going out to see some people and drive.
Yeah, we're happy to provide that update as well. That's not a problem.
Good. Councillor Errington, you sent me an email over the weekend with regard to my alerts or emails or something.
Yes, it's just something that came up actually at a planning meeting, but I won't dwell too much on that. I'd just be really interested to understand the effectiveness of my alerts. Understand that you can't automatically harvest people's data, so it's only when people actually ask to receive them. One of the things that came up at planning was that people didn't know about it, this particular planning issue. And I had a similar issue in my ward, and so I asked the digital transformation manager to give me some stats on the particular area who had said we don't know about it. And actually their uptake for my alerts was a lot higher than the average. I just wonder, as a council, I know that the IT department have had to completely change direction thanks to COVID, but I just wondered whether it would be worth having the head of that department here to sort of explain how my alerts work, how effective it is, who we think are getting the emails. I thought there was some move towards an app maybe, which might appeal to younger people, because I know my young people don't read emails anymore. It all has to be quite instant. So I was just thinking, as communication is quite an important part of our role, it'd be interesting to see whether that particular mode of communication is effective and whether we should be looking to up it or change it. I just wondered what other members thought.
Yeah, I'll admit that my alerts is looked at every single Wednesday about 10:30 in the evening before I wheeled a bin down the bottom because I never know. So there it is. Anybody else have any thoughts on my alerts? Do we use it? Councillor Coleman, you're young.
It's one of my many qualifications, yeah. On the subject of app usage, I think it is a good idea in principle, whether, especially in terms of young people, whether a young person would ever consider downloading a Rother District Council app is a further hurdle to jump. I think the key might be integrating my alerts with already existing apps. I know Rye have now got the app called, is it a Rye Good Time, which I thought, great name for an app. If other towns have like town apps, if we have apps like Nextdoor, for example, and if Bexhill and other towns wanted to create their own little like apps similar to the Rye Good Time app, then maybe we could siphon my alerts onto those somehow. But I don't think setting up an app specifically for my alerts will reach the demographic that we'd be intending. But it'd be worth hearing from IT what they
could look a bit of a square. I'll use the word square, but
I mean, I'd download it.
If someone, 20-something-year-old with Rother District Council app on his phone could give a square. As opposed to me, it would be all right. Go on.
As the head of that department, or at least until 2 weeks ago, actually, no, the reach of the My Alerts thing is a great idea to have that on the work programme at some point. I don't know whether we're going to have time for it within this civic year, but of course we can maybe put it on record it on the items for consideration to make sure that it stays there. I think the way we communicate out to our residents and customers is really important, and actually My Alerts has one of the biggest reaches. And I don't want to get into the debate now because I won't want to take that away from that opportunity. But I think it's a great idea to have that on the working programme.
Okay, got that, Louise? Cool. Ready? Looks like it. Well, I'll declare the meeting closed at 7:45. Thank you very much for your attendance.